Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you for listening and thank you for tuning in. My name is Jordan,
My name is Paul.
and this is the first episode of our podcast.
We are tentatively calling it Humanity Restored because we're both Dark Souls fans.
Yeah.
And kind of the aim of the podcast, or at least the way we are envisioning it, is we talk about current issues, current events, or just interesting thought pieces that we are also looking to dive into and explore them, and hopefully bring some humanity to the whole situation.
Restore some humanity.
Restore it. Bring it back and
Oh.
restore it.
Cheers. We had this idea last year in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. It's now 2022, January 4th, and we're finally getting around to this. So maybe we can just introduce ourselves a little more for anyone who may not know us personally.
Yeah,
So I can go first.
sure.
I mean, we're living in Chicago, Illinois, and we met at school. We both studied music and
Mhm.
found we had similar interests, namely gaming and hanging out. But it soon became like more than that. We were talking about things we were studying that didn't have anything to do with music.
Yeah, like for me, a big turning point in college was a course called States, Markets, and Societies. Took it my junior year,
States,
and that was
markets, and
something
societies.
that I kind of came running to my friend group, Jordan included, just about everything we were talking about, because at the time it was so mind blowing to me. All of these economic theories, and kind of the class functioned as a overall breakdown of kind of the last 100 years for the world economically, and sort of tried to explain how we got to where we are now, especially over the last 20 to 30 years, or really since the 80s was kind of like a big turning point.
The Reagan era.
The Reagan era, yes, exactly, and sort of the deregulation of markets, and that opened up this whole can of worms, where this was winter of 2019, I think.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Yeah, where
Just
we
before
were
COVID.
Yeah, like almost exactly a year before COVID, where we actually started. That was kind of where we first started getting in the habit of talking about these things on a regular basis. We would have hour-long phone calls, which turned into 2-hour-long phone calls,
Yeah.
and even while we were hanging out in person,
Right.
we would talk about these things just on our way to events or just hanging out.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since then, we've kind of been brewing this idea about a podcast, because it's one thing to talk about it amongst ourselves, and it's another thing to share. And we felt like we kind of wanted to share this journey with more people than just ourselves, and hopefully sharing our conversations does something.
Yeah, I think that's good, and I think that definitely sums up in kind of a nice way how we started talking about these things over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
One thing I'm kind of hoping for this is that it becomes maybe a regular component of our discussions, like the podcast itself, and also like a way to communicate with other people on these topics. Like I was talking with a friend on the phone last night. I mentioned the podcast idea, and she sort of encouraged me to like just go for it. And
Yeah.
then I called you.
Right.
But one of the reasons she was so encouraging is because I would like to interview her at some point, just on her own experience during all of this, because she has been working in a pharmacy during the entire pandemic, and she's really seen like, the nitty gritty of how the vaccines were rolled out and how the testing has been going like throughout. Because I'm sure it's had numerous ups and downs.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that would be certainly another component
Right.
to strive for, would be to bring other
interviews.
people in.
Yeah.
And I think we should start with maybe people close to us.
Oh yeah, I mean, we have people from both our lives who like
exactly
who know a lot about certain things.
we even just talking about this, I'm getting ideas about
Mhm.
people who I know who I could bring, especially in terms of relevance to the pandemic. Like you mentioned, your friend in the pharmacies.
Mhm.
My dad.
Yeah.
We could call my dad. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, my dad's been kind of on the forefront of this too. As
Could get him on Zoom.
yeah, we could have a Zoom session, podcast Zoom, record the
Yeah.
meeting.
Right now we're doing this on photo booth.
Yeah, it's very lo-fi.
Super
but,
lo-fi.
I think we're gonna have some fun with it.
Yeah.
We gonna keep it pretty low key. I brought in this article that I actually found this morning, doing an activity that we refer to, and I'm sure most people refer to as scrolling.
Scrolling.
My morning scroll.
So much scrolling.
Usually, my morning scroll is fruitless. I read all these headlines that are either just clickbait or, well, they're almost all clickbait.
Yeah.
But
They're all
I just
clickbait
read
now.
these headlines and just end up getting like mildly to severely irritated, and then I put my phone down and actually get out of bed.
Mhm.
But today, I found an article that I thought might be a nice jumping off place and just kind of lay a little bit of groundwork for future podcasts and future discussions. This tackles the ideas of climate change.
Mhm. Very relevant topic these days.
Yeah.
God.
Um,
Whenever, yeah, I was in my phone conversation last night with my friend. I'll just keep her nameless for now. Yeah.
Mhm.
But she mentioned how over the past year, like even talking with strangers or even old friends, there's only one thing to talk about, and that is the past year and a half,
Yeah.
2 years ish. Right?
Yeah.
Like everyone talks about how different it is, and everyone talks about how like, you know, all of these new rules coming into play and how our lives have changed and all this. It's
Right.
really on everyone's mind.
Yeah.
And
you
it's
were-
hard to talk about anything else.
and especially as saturated as our news sources are with this, it
Yeah.
just kind of reinforces that sense of like, this is the only thing to talk about. But I'm sure we can find several other things that aren't directly addressing the issue, but kind of part of a greater whole. Like maybe I was thinking it would be cool, you know, sometime to maybe talk about your experience with martial arts.
Yeah.
And with exercise, with nutrition. I mean, there's so many different things
Oh yeah.
that we can bring, because these last few years have brought a lot of those things
Yeah.
to the forefront of our lives, and like
Just-
us reevaluating what's important.
Just like a change in overall consciousness, really. Like,
Yeah.
but we're just aware of so many more things day to day,
Mhm.
you know, and the ramifications or implications of all of these things we see every day and take for granted, like plastic,
Right.
you know, which has astounding implications,
Yeah.
which we're about to get into.
Yeah, so this article that I found on my morning scroll today also had kind of a clickbaity title. We don't really have the tech right now to display the article in real time, but the title is "How Bad Are Plastics Really?" And I was like kind of mad when I first read that, because I was like, this author is seriously gonna. They struck up this tone in my head, at least, of someone who is like, you know, how bad are plastics really? They're
Yeah.
not that bad, are they? And so that's
Well,
how
I mean, you could read it a few different ways.
Yeah.
How bad are plastics? Really? No, really?
really,
You know?
they're that bad. Yeah. So in my mind, I kind of cynically thought that Rebecca Altman, the author of this article, was kind of challenging the threat of plastics, or like discrediting them as a real topic, a serious topic. But
Just reading the subheading, it
Yes.
becomes clear her position.
as I found out once I clicked it, as I was baited to do so, the subtitle reads, "Plastic production just keeps expanding and now is becoming a driving cause of climate change," by Rebecca Altman. So then I was like, okay, I'm interested. And then I looked at the size of the scroll bar and realized that this was a pretty in-depth article. It's a teeny
Yeah.
tiny scroll bar. So quite a long article.
Yeah.
And if I was to quick and dirty summarize it, it would be the first part talks about her personal connection to plastic. Her father worked in this very definite, he worked in the plastics manufacturing kind of industry at a very crucial time for plastics in the 60s and 70s.
Okay.
And so her family and her father in particular, excuse me, very connected to plastics in terms of like a living. Their stability is based off of this industry. So she talks about she gives this exposition about her dad. Then she gets more into the general history of plastics in order to kind of explain both their cultural implications over time and just the nitty-gritty science of how they came to be, and
Gotcha.
like the raw materials used to make plastics, the chemical consequences of using those particular raw materials, and how the materials actually changed over time. She describes how many plastics actually used to be made from a very, I don't want to use the word organic, but I guess I will. Like, one example was like wheat, cellulose, like things grown from crops.
Yeah.
And she kind of explains economically why they abandon those things for fossil fuels, which is like
Interesting. So there were economic
98
reasons.
to 99% of all plastics now are made through like fossil oils, like petroleum, things like that. So she goes into that and then finally synthesizes her personal connection with plastic and the history of plastic to kind of explain why it's an important talking point and to kind of explain the dangers of plastic. So I'll get into this a little bit and
Okay.
then we'll take breaks and like break down kind of paragraph by paragraph or section by section. So
We don't have to read all of this intro either.
right. I'll read a little bit of it
Sure.
and then just kind of find a good stopping place. So she opens up with this. This is hardly the time to talk about plastics, is what I think when Dad, hovering over the waste bin at a post funeral potluck, waves me over, his gesture discreet but emphatic. He has retrieved from the trash a crystalline plastic cup with fluted rigid sides. Polystyrene, he grins, inverting the cup to reveal its resin code, a 6 stamped inside the recycling symbol, but not my kind.
Can I pop in here real quick?
Yeah.
So the resin code looks very similar to the recycling symbol that we have on like our recycling bins and
Yeah.
on trucks, that pick up recycling and stuff. But it's not a recycling symbol.
Yeah.
It just refers to the type of plastic that the object, like the plastic cup in this case, is made out of. And so in certain localities, only, resin codes 1 and 2 are recyclable, and there are like 7 or 8 of them.
Yeah. There are more codes
Yeah.
than recyclable plastics.
Yeah. And they specifically designed the symbol itself. I mean, it's hard to believe it wasn't.
Yeah.
Deliberately designed to look just like the recycling symbol.
It's
very misleading.
The triangle, the 3 arrows, the reduce, reuse, recycle arrows of the the whole campaign.
But
I'll continue
polystyrene.
on. Polystyrene, not her dad's kind of plastic. She goes on, Dad, back in the 1960s, had manufactured a more resilient variety of polystyrene for Union Carbide, one of the 20th century's major plastics manufacturers, since acquired by Dow Chemical Company. Now in the parish hall, I recognize he is seconds from crushing the cup. As if on cue, he closes his grip. Being a certain type of polystyrene, and this is his point, the cup splinters to a strange bloom of shards arrayed about the cup's circular bottom. I still don't know how to pronounce this word, but it's spelled Butadiene.
Butadiene?
Yeah, it sounds like weirdly exotic.
Or maybe butadiene?
That's how I want to say it. That sounds more like a chemical.
Yeah.
Butadiene. No butadiene.
Or butadiene?
Buta, like derived from butane, perhaps. Yeah. So she thinks it, and then he says, no butadiene. Forgive the mispronunciation if I'm mispronouncing it. He says, which on the production lines he ran had been added to rubberize the resin. So that
Oh,
was like a chemical they used to make it more flexible, and he just crushed this cup that like splintered more like glass. So that's how he could tell there was
gotcha.
none of this stuff in it.
Sounds very cheap.
Yeah, one among 10,000 helpmates that made plastic as we know them possible. Dad shuffles off to find the recycling bin, though he knows the cup has little chance for recovery and likely a long afterlife ahead. Um, this is especially true for polystyrenes, of which there are multiple varieties. Plastics, as the anthropologist Tridibish Day notes, are a chemically complex lot, designed for performance rather than reclamation.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's obvious once you take you just think at all about any number of single-use plastics that we encounter on a daily basis.
Mhm.
It's obvious that they're designed just to be thrown out, used once, thrown out. Like you can try and reuse a plastic water bottle, but it's going to disintegrate slowly over time and become unusable.
I'm gonna,
Certain kinds of plastic, at least.
yeah,
There are thicker and thinner types.
yeah, and she's kind of foreshadowing here how, well, not really foreshadowing, just illustrating how plastic has become an afterthought in terms of where it goes and you know how long it's there, whether it's in a landfill or elsewhere. It's all like this person she quoted says, meant for performance, not for reclamation.
When it's cheap too.
Yeah,
This is the whole point. This stuff is cheaper than like making everything out of paper or
yeah,
like anything that's biodegradable.
yeah, and that's actually something crazy that she gets into, is that it's so affordable and mass produced and ubiquitous, and yet it's so much more chemically complex. It's this substance that we just kind of invented and then managed to produce a ton of it, and yet the research, as she kind of says towards the end of the article, the research on how this substance impacts the environment is really just starting. Like we're just starting to realize that, hey, we have a ton of this stuff and it doesn't degrade very fast, and we're finding, you know, like molecules of it in the sea, in our food, like
In
everywhere. Microplastics
It's in our bodies.
Yeah,
now.
we often joke about like we find some like really suspicious food product that's like packaged and we're like, this definitely has microplastics in it. And now they're going to be in me.
They already are.
They're in like we have a percentage of microplastics in us. I'm going to go ahead and finish the intro because it actually functions as sort of a summary, and then I can just pick out paragraphs from the rest of the article.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, Dad once believed that plastics could be reused indefinitely. I imagine that maybe he thought plastics, like their makers, deserve the chance to begin again. When Union Carbide downsized in the 1970s, Dad took severance and stayed home with my siblings until he could figure out what a life beyond plastics might look like. The answer, it turned out, was public administration. For a time, he ran my hometown's recycling program. Recycling, though, never lived up to Dad's ideal. Of all the plastics made over his lifetime, less than 10% has been effectively repurposed. This failure, like so many other aspects of our relationship with plastics, is often framed in terms of individual shortcomings. Plastics producers or the geopolitics that have made plastics so widespread are rarely called out. But to read plastics history is to discover another story. Demand for plastic has been as manufactured as plastics themselves. Society is awash in throwaway plastics not because of the logic of desire, but because of the logic of history and of integrated industrial systems. I think that's an interesting claim, and one she doesn't really fully answer, in the sense that she answers like the latter half of it. She does explain how it's because of the logic of history and of integrated industrial systems. She doesn't really revisit the not because of the logic of desire part.
I see.
But she does a good job of listing kind of the historical facts and kind of assembling the argument that way. Anyway, For decades, the industry has created the illusion that its problems are well under control, all while intensifying production and promotion. More plastics have been made over the past 2 decades than during the second half of the 21st century. The second half of the 20th century. So, more plastics in the last 20 years than have been made in
shit,
the
really?
50 years before that.
1950 through 2000.
Yeah.
God.
Today, recycling is a failing system,
I like that.
and yet it is still touted as plastic's panacea. No end of the pipe fix can manage mass plastics volume, complex toxicity, or legacy of pollution, and the industry's long-standing infractions against human health and rights. All of this has been true for years, but if there's a time to talk about plastics, now might be it. Plastics are poised to dominate the 21st century as one of the yet unchecked drivers of climate change.
And there's the intro.
Yeah.
That's a big statement there at the end there.
Yeah.
Because that makes me think ahead and wonder, if we keep accelerating our production of these plastics, as she has stated, we've produced more plastics in the past 20 years than the previous 50.
Yeah.
What's the world going to look like in 70 years?
Yeah. She has a prediction for that.
I'm sure she does.
Yeah. So this last sentence.
Plastics are poised to dominate the 21st century as one of the yet unchecked drivers of climate change.
So let me just skip all of the history that she gives us here, just to get right to where she backs up that, because I think this is the core of the article and the most important part for us to kind of talk about and think about. So let's see if I can find here. Commonplace club. All right. Moreover, ubiquity.
It really is ubiquitous. I was just thinking about how most objects I interact with on a daily basis, aside from like clothing, although some clothing does have plastic in it. Polyester is a form of plastic.
Yeah. And quite ubiquitous in my wardrobe, polyester.
Yeah.
And it's hard to that's an interesting factor that you bring up with clothing, because polyester clothing has many upsides to it in terms of like ease of care, longevity. Cotton, as anyone who owns a pair of jeans will know, is finicky.
Yeah.
And takes a lot of damage, and if manufactured cheaply, doesn't even really last that long at all. Like just a basic any name brand like department store you can think of, like how Old Navy has their own line of clothing.
Yeah. It's also cheap.
Those like cheap, just like a basic t-shirt, cotton t-shirt.
Yeah. I'm thinking of H&M specifically.
Yeah. I kind of had them in mind as well. I was kind of a Old Navy guy growing up, but
anytime I went to H&M, I got something that looked cool, but then immediately disintegrated.
Yeah. I had that experience several times with just like t-shirts from like Target, and I have found some great t-shirts from Target, but anyway, that's besides the point. Like,
I think that's an interesting thing to talk about though, because like we have so many clothes now. I just got a couple more t-shirts as a gift the other day.
Yeah.
Just 2 more t-shirts.
Here you go.
Add them to the stack.
Yeah.
And if I think back like 100, 200 years, what did the average person or the person in our like,
right,
from our background, how many shirts did they have? They didn't have t-shirts.
Yeah. And like how many shirts did they go through?
Exactly.
How many shirts did they throw away or give away?
How many did they use over the course of their life? We've already surpassed the vast majority of human history in terms of just us.
Yeah.
And we haven't even been around that long.
In terms of like sheer material consumption in clothing. There are other articles too that kind of zero in on this topic too. I remember seeing one probably maybe half a year ago now about kind of the clothing crisis in terms of like the world as a whole is accumulating clothes at a faster it's accumulating clothing that is trash, basically. That
unusable garments.
It's garments that have been used, thrown away, or like donated, and then there's no place for them. And they kind of equate it to like the big plastic island in the sea.
Yeah.
There's also kind of a big pit of clothing in the world.
I'm sure
That's
there's
like,
several.
it's just like throwaway. Anyway, that's kind of intertwined with
Mhm.
this article. I think I found it. So we have, this is more of a chemical analysis. Yeah, so here we go. This is where she gets into emissions and like the nitty gritty of why plastic is set to be like the number one contributor to climate change. So she goes, um, the U.S. fracking boom, or what's been called the shale revolution, has fueled plastic's most recent expansion. Fracking has made the U.S. the world's largest producer of oil and gas, resulting in a glut. Kathy
glut.
Hipple, a senior research fellow at the Ohio River Valley Institute, told me this oversupply of feedstock, she explained before I got to this part.
Mm-hmm.
Feedstock is her term for the ingredients of plastic.
The raw materials.
It's the raw materials.
Feedstock. Okay.
So this oversupply of feedstock drove another round of investments in plastics plants, which in turn, Hipple explains, has forced an excess of plastic packaging onto the market, more than demand can absorb. These plastics, now primarily polyethylenes and polypropylenes, made from natural gas liquids, have reduced polystyrene to a minor player in the packaging and disposables market, about 2%.
Do you remember what it was before this?
In the 70s and 80s, I don't know how much more it was, but I feel like it was fairly ubiquitous.
Mm-hmm.
That
polystyrene.
Yeah.
Interesting.
In particular.
And
Tongue
now
in
it's only
cheek,
2%.
I've taken to calling plastic's latest output frackaging.
Frackaging. That's amazing.
But
wait, before we go on, could you
Yeah.
scroll back up there?
Mhm.
The this part here, Hipple explains that the oversupply of feedstock drove another round of investments in plastic plants, which has forced an excess of plastic packaging onto the market, more than demand can absorb. That's interesting to me because we've always been taught that supply and demand go hand in hand,
Mhm.
and they both influence each other. And now we have a clear imbalance. There's more plastic than the market can absorb.
Right. And the way that they are trying to navigate this is by kind of forcing the market to need more plastic. That's kind of the conundrum.
Oh, I see.
Is like the plastic manufacturers obviously want us to buy their plastic.
Yeah, that's how they make a profit.
That's how they make a profit. So what happened was US had a fracking boom. Now we are all of a sudden the biggest producer of oil and gas.
And we have a surplus.
And we have a surplus of feedstock driving. We're like, what do we do with all of these ingredients for plastic? Well, obviously we have to make more plastic. So there you go. Drove another round of investments in plastic plants, which are extremely complex facilities. So there's a lot of money that went into that. And then obviously to make up the profit margin, they have to sell it. And there is more plastic than the market can absorb now, but they're going to start to look for ways to, sell more plastic.
Yeah.
But the economics of plastics is once again changing as energy and transportation shift away from fossil fuels like, electric cars, mag trains, all this kind of stuff. Plastics seem to many oil and gas producers like one of the few opportunities to keep growing. So like oil producers used to sell, like gas, other petroleum products that were used for fuels, namely as this article illustrates. Now that the demand for fuels isn't necessarily disappearing, it's shrinking. They're looking, it says, plastic producers, they like these other forms of plastic are kind of like the last resort for plastic producers.
Right.
So they grow more and more dependent on them. Some new mega plants, such as China's Zhoushan Green Petrochemical Base, convert crude oil rather than refinery byproducts directly into chemicals and plastics. So I guess this also takes some explaining from previously in the article. It used to be that plastics were made from byproducts of other production. It was like a tree. You'd have like a goal product like rubber or something at the very end of the tree, and then making that would create all of these byproducts.
Interesting.
And plastic used to be a matter of figuring out what to do with those byproducts, and that's how other chemical compounds were invented.
That's why there's so many kinds of plastic.
Yeah, was literally by convenient accidents of saying, hey, we created this kind of like junk. If we synthesize it into a stable thing, it behaves this way. Boom, plastic bags
Mhm.
or styrofoam or, you know, any one of these
Right.
chemicals.
And
But now,
these products are so cheap too.
yeah. And that's why they were originally so cheap, is they were byproducts of other products. Now she's saying that because they need to keep growing,
Mhm.
and because there's a shift away from fossil fuels in other markets, they're just using the fossil fuels. They're just pulling them straight from the straight crude oil
Yeah.
is going right into plastics production.
Holy crap. Wait, so
Rather than
they're not even producing, you know, they're not going in with the intent of producing like one material and
Yeah.
then using the leftover excess to produce other things.
Yeah.
They're just saying screw it. And what happens to the rest of the waste?
well,
Because there's
that's
more waste now.
yeah, that's kind of touched on. The main point that she wanted to bring up with this is saying that, like, this isn't this is kind of an overgeneralization,
Mhm.
but let's say that like 50% of crude oil at one point was going into like gasoline
Sure.
and other fuel-based products, and the other 50% was going into plastics. That ratio is shifting in the favor of
so
plastics
now plastics
now.
are growing and fuel
and
is shrinking.
and crude oil-based fuels are shrinking.
In
That's
some
not
parts
the
of the
whole
world, I
picture.
feel like in other parts of the world, other than the U.S. it's-
and China,
and China, it's
Yeah.
probably still mostly fuels
right?
that are like making the bulk of oil sales.
Yeah. So,
Although I have no way to
yeah,
prove that.
but that's kind of what she's saying.
Right.
And then she goes on, and this is partly how plastics would come to produce a greater share of the world's carbon emissions. Should U.S. plastics production continue to grow as the industry projects? This paragraph's really important. By 2030, it will eclipse the climate contributions of coal-fired power plants. Or by another measure, the current growth trajectory means that by 2050, the industry's emissions would eat up 15% and potentially more of the global carbon budget. How much varies by feedstock and type of plastic, but on average, 1.89 metric tons of carbon dioxide, equivalents, a composite measure of greenhouse gases, is produced for every metric ton of plastic made.
There's more carbon dioxide equivalents, greenhouse gases,
Yeah.
produced than plastic.
Yeah, so it takes more than a ton, almost twice as much carbon dioxide
Almost twice as
emissions
much.
to make a certain amount of plastic. You end up making
That's insane.
1.89 times more carbon dioxide than the plastic you've made
By weight,
by weight. Yeah.
metric tons. Wow.
Metric tons is a crazy big scale in terms of measuring carbon dioxide.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a metric ton of plastic, by comparison, is not that much when you consider how much is in the world.
Well, there's more than double,
Yeah.
the metric tons carbon dioxide equivalents. That's amazing. I had
Yeah.
no idea it was that much.
Yeah.
Just on plastic production alone.
Yeah. So she continues, emissions stem from upstream fossil fuel production and
There it is.
processing. But there are concerns too about the potential for even more emissions at the other end of the life cycle. Should states greenlight industry proposals to expand such carbon-intensive waste management technologies as incineration, refuse-derived fuels, and molecular, chemical, and so-called advanced recycling? These unproven technologies use high heat and other methods to convert waste into feedstocks for making more plastics.
So they're just burning it.
They're burning it, basically. As of now, such technologies shift, quote, the landfill from the ground to the sky, which I think is a very eloquent way of putting it, says Yobal Novian Putra, who works on Asia-Pacific climate and energy policy for the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. I like how there is a Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives.
They're like, guys, come on. There's got to be another way.
It's a whole organization of people saying that, guys.
Imagine
gotta
getting a
be
letter
another
from
way.
the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives asking you to turn off your incinerator.
We have noticed that you have been a major contributor of carbon dioxide, and we at the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives recommend that you stop, which in turn has implications for both air quality and climate, of course.
Yeah. So basically, Could you go back up to that other paragraph where
about the percentage.
yes, this one here. By 2030, plastic production will eclipse the climate contributions of coal-fired power plants.
Mhm.
That's soon.
Yeah.
That's right around the corner.
Yeah.
And, you know, people always talk about coal as like a dirty power source. It pollutes so much, and it's also just very dangerous to work with, you know, in mine. But, yeah, plastic production.
So this is also where I'll interject, excuse me, a kind of a personal opinion about this, and I feel like you also kind of align with this, and maybe kind of the political argument for policymakers who believe that plastic is a good alternative to coal. I believe that this illustrates that even if it is cleaner than coal, it's not clean enough.
Well, yeah.
It's producing so much carbon dioxide still.
Yeah.
For something that also, as she illustrated in the next paragraph, takes a lot of energy and carbon dioxide to recycle and or get rid of too. Because its life is so long, it doesn't go away on its own, really.
Yeah, I mean, you have to burn fossil fuels to move the used plastic items to the landfill.
Yeah, she even says this too. But petrochemical production itself is also energy intensive. Among the top two energy users in the manufacturing sector, even if the industry were to convert to low carbon energy sources or to adopt problematic carbon capture and storage, plastics would remain a significant emitter of climate relevant gases.
Yeah, so they're they're producing greenhouse gases by producing greenhouse gases, basically.
Yeah, like not only does it take an immense production of greenhouse gases to make the plastic, but it also produces more greenhouse gases to get rid of it or to convert it to other plastics.
And the actual process of refining it itself.
Yeah, and the process of refining it also burns more fossil fuels.
Yeah, so there's so much to these like imagine a carbon tax on these businesses. You know, they're putting out 1.89 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents like per metric ton of plastic. And if they had to pay for that, they wouldn't make money on plastic anymore.
Yeah. And depending on the law, it would either completely crash plastic production or it would send the prices of plastic through the roof and then it would crash. There's no way out of a carbon tax for plastic production.
Wow. So that I think that's like the counter argument to the carbon tax. You know, it would crash the whole market.
There's just like it would be drastic.
But that's the idea. That's why
it would be.
That's why people get behind it, is because it's such a radical idea. It would change the way things are done around here.
Personally like the idea. This opens up a whole discussion about financial incentivization, which brings in like other authors that you and I both know we're going to talk about in the future, like
David Harvey,
and Michael Sandel, Mariana Mazzucato,
maybe even Byung-Chul
Han. Yep. I was just thinking about Byung-Chul Han today. Anyway,
what were you thinking about?
I was actually in the shower. Like
shower
thinking,
thoughts.
Literally shower thoughts. Thinking about like what I read in school, his topology of violence, and I was actually just going over the paper I had written.
Yeah. Like in your head?
In my head about my arguments.
Yeah.
And I was trying to like argue for Byung-Chul Han against my paper.
Okay.
But I still like sort of came out with a good argument. I was mostly just fact checking my paper and seeing like how well my arguments held up. Anyway,
Byung-Chul Han.
He
wrote the Burnout Society.
He did write the Burnout Society, and that's something we should definitely visit because I feel like a lot of people our age, just about everyone now,
are burnt the fuck out.
has some sort of burnout experience, if not now, at some other point in their lives.
Maybe in school.
Oh, this is the conclusion. These are the last two paragraphs. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You want to just go?
Well,
I mean, so what is she suggesting here? Does she have any like, you know, suggestions as to how we change our ways?
Well, her conclusion is very open ended in the sense that like she's just trying to bring attention to this issue.
Okay.
She's mostly saying she's trying to inform us about the history and mostly just the history and composition
Mhm.
of plastic, what it used to be, how it got to be what it is now, and what it is now, and its
Okay.
implications for the environment. And her argument is very simple. It's bad for the environment and we should
Mhm.
do something about it. She does not offer very many like lined out solutions.
Mhm.
However, she does highlight a few important things. Yet to date, climate policy has not focused on manufacturing or plastics, which I think is an interesting thing to explore further
Mhm.
on my own and on our own. Just look into what climate policy has focused on, because I know we've
Yeah.
talked about a general carbon tax.
Well, it's mostly energy.
Yeah,
It's all energy
the
related,
energy sector,
as
right?
far as I know. Like,
Yeah, like the whole campaign promises of like getting rid of coal, or
yeah.
in Trump's case, I think it was maintaining coal. Right,
Hmm.
he wanted to continue
Hmm.
coal based
In a
energy.
way, that's his climate policy.
Right. Yeah.
And so,
So
did I don't remember 100%. The Biden administration said on the campaign trail they would get rid of coal
I don't know if they
or like,
explicitly
or
said
maybe
that.
reduce the amount.
Yeah, I that's one part I actually failed to pay too much attention to,
Yeah,
which
really.
I should have.
It's hard to pay attention to them at all.
Yeah. I mean, I would
They
what
don't,
it seemed
yeah.
like to me is that they wanted to try to make this like smooth transition of
Hmm.
like we are going to invest more in like green energy research, but we're not going to just axe coal. I
Right.
think that was their stance. They were attempting to be fairly like moderate and slow paced
Okay,
in
yeah.
terms of like we want to create a transitional time, I think
I
was
see.
their sort of campaign promise. But I don't
Yeah.
quote me on that because I would have to read more. Anyway, she claims, and too often, plastics proliferation can seem of secondary importance as climate disasters accelerate. But plastics
Hmm.
and climate aren't separate issues. They're structurally linked problems and also mutually compounding, with plastics facilities spewing climate relevant emissions and extreme weather further dispersing plastic into the environment. Research is underway to study their interaction, the way, say, thermal stress affects how species respond to toxic exposures. But they have the same root. Plastic is carbon, fossil fuels in another form,
Hmm.
SEAL's president Carol Muffett told me. Or as the geographer Deidre McKay phrases it, plastic is climate change, just in its solid state. Um, she goes on to say
Yeah.
about how the science is fairly new and how
Hmm.
scientists are just barely discovering how plastic is interacting with plankton, other plants, the sea mostly.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Well, I feel like a lot of people know about the Pacific island, the Pacific
the floating
plastic
island.
patch or whatever. What is
Yeah.
it called? The Great
The Great
Plastic.
Pacific Garbage Patch or
That's
something
right.
like
Yeah.
that.
It's not just plastic out there.
Yeah.
It's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
It's probably mostly plastic.
The one of the most alarming, one of the most immediately alarming things that they've discovered about plastics is that it's affecting how plankton metabolize.
That's crazy, dude.
And plankton are the world's biggest oxygen supply.
Oh my god.
They're the world's biggest recycler of carbon dioxide because they are the
Yeah.
plankton are the like the world's biggest forest, so to speak.
Mhm.
They are single celled plants.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They supply the
They just
entire
float around.
yeah and photosynthesize, and they supply
It's
the
amazing.
entire ocean, really the entire world,
Yeah.
with energy because everything is derived from the ocean.
Mhm.
Anyway, the main conclusion of this paragraph, but early indications that plastic pollution may interfere with the largest natural carbon sink on the planet should be cause for immediate attention and serious concern. So
Yeah.
consider me concerned. So the last paragraph kind of brings it all to a close.
Yeah.
She talks about her dad,
Yeah.
and basically just says like, there's all these crazy things going on as waters rise and shorelines recede amidst droughts and deluge, cancers and extinctions, deadly heat and pandemics. It might not seem like the right time to talk about plastics, about the excess of war matured throwaway plastics foisted into society that can now be found everywhere, anywhere, but it is, and the world doesn't have a moment to waste. So it's a very urgent conclusion that's very open-ended, and there's no solution. This article more serves as one of the more complete overviews of plastic that I've seen.
I like this article. We didn't get into the history very much, but
I
mean, it looks in depth.
It is very in depth. It's mostly around. I'll just summarize. It's mostly around World War II. Plastics' very first boom was the war in the form of rubbers, different types of rubbers for just anything rubber, like tank treads, infantry boots, a lot of kind of clothing-based applications.
Grommets.
Yeah, just rubber as in general. And so, oh yeah, here we go. But polystyrene also shared base ingredients with another material crucial to modern mechanized warfare, styrene this word again.
I think it's butadiene.
Butadiene rubber, or SBR. Rubber made up tank treads, bomber tires, the soles of boots that soldiers wore. Germany's colossal IG. There was like a plastic arms race.
God,
IG Farben had already been synthesizing Buna S rubber. It was coal derived. It was a coal derived version of SBR. So like there was this arms race too, where it's like we can make better plastic. The Germans are ahead of us. We got to catch up. That sort of ideal. They made rubber styrene. It led to the styrene too came with risks. So vinyl chloride monomer was
another type of plastic.
Was a type of it was kind of one of the original plastics, and of course it was carcinogenic, caused cancer. And they never really solved that problem because basically every plastic following that still was relatively carcinogenic. Butadiene. So here we see the transition. Grain held its own during the war, but afterward, the federally backed petroleum boom routed any possibility of a carbohydrate-dominated chemical and plastics industry. Grain harvests were deemed too irregular, too beholden to the seasons, to floods and droughts, and thus to price fluctuations. So it was just too unpredictable how grain would be as a feedstock.
That was the feedstock originally.
Yeah.
It wasn't petroleum.
It was one of them. There was coal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They still made it from petroleum, but it was a much smaller percentage of the feedstock.
And then they ramped up production for the war.
And then they were like, hey, what do we do now that we have all of these facilities? By the 1950s, the government had sold its wartime rubber factories to private interests.
There you go.
There's
and they want a return on the investment. So they're going to make as much plastic and get it into as many products as they can.
Right. Styrene, as Dow advertised, this was an ad campaign, received its honorable discharge so it could serve a world at peace.
That is so messed up, man.
Yeah, the war is over. So now we're just going to sell plastic.
We're going to serve a peaceful world with plastic. And you know what plastic is used for now? Mechanized warfare.
Yeah, exactly. C4 is a type of plastic. It's a plastic bomb.
Plastic that explodes.
Yeah, highly volatile plastic.
Yeah. Well, and it's still used for those things that they used it for in World War II. Tank treads
like rubber,
and boots and stuff.
Yeah, it's just better rubber now.
Yeah.
The outlet for excess styrene, more polystyrene, some portion of which would later be modified into high impact grades. Dad's kind of polystyrene.
Like polymer.
Yeah, I like that.
They make weapons out of polymer.
She calls back to Dad's type of plastic.
Yeah.
That
image though in the intro of her dad crushing the plastic cup and it's splintering into pieces.
Yeah.
I've done that before. We've all done that. We've seen that cheap, like clear, crinkly plastic that just it cracks into pieces in your hands. Well, and those pieces don't go away.
Do you still have that bag of chips?
Yeah, I've got a bag of chips.
That's okay. There are examples of plastic.
Anyone who listens to this in 2022 is gonna know the sound.
They know the sound of
a crinkly plastic bag.
My favorite instance of that like crinkly sound is when it's like a disturbance in some sort of piece, like someone who brings in candy to a movie theater.
Yeah,
and it's like a really quiet part of the movie, and you just hear like an M&M's bag like crinkling in the back of the movie theater, and you're like, God, it's plastic.
Plastic again. Yeah, it causes noise pollution because it's not a pleasant sound.
Yeah, no, it's never a pleasant sound.
So not only is it causing greenhouse gas emissions, but it's causing noise pollution.
Yeah,
And it's like
it's just annoying.
the way companies market objects that they package in plastic with those bright colors and they paint everything. And
Yeah.
I mean, is it even paint? How do they dye plastic bags?
I mean, do you want to know? I don't know.
I
don't
mean,
know the
I kind
answer.
of do want to know, but they I'm sure it's harmful for the environment. Whatever the hell they're doing.
Whatever the color. I mean, it's
Oh, it's all artificial colors.
it's
Which
red
are
40, but
also-
inedible.
Yes, and Red
paint.
40 is a petroleum-based product.
Yes.
It is. It's not plastic, but it's derived from petroleum.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things that they probably aimed to make. You
Yeah.
know, like let's make a red dye out of this petroleum,
Right.
an artificial red dye, and whatever was left over could make some clear plastic, or maybe that's how it worked. I'm not really sure, but that's kind of the idea I'm getting from this article here.
Yeah. This next section in the history was the post-war transition to how plastic became what it is today. I'll just read the most important sentences because there's a few cool ones. Not cool. Well, they're very informative, I guess. So here's one. When the industry couldn't invent new markets for example, the Tupperware party, it pushed into established ones by underbidding leather, cotton, glass, and metals. So
Yeah.
they sold plastic for cheaper than those things could be acquired for, and anyone who was looking for a cheaper alternative,
They're just gonna get the plastic.
they're just going to get the plastic. Still, sales were such that by the mid-1950s, as the plastic scholar, I'd like to be a plastics scholar, as the plastic scholar Max Liboiron has explained, the industry looked for growth by moving plastics not into homes, but through them.
There it is.
So there's the genius
There it is.
of
Yeah.
marketing. We're going to make disposables, which at the time, I mean, there was no science behind why it was harmful or anything.
No.
It was incredibly, it was a breakthrough.
All they were thinking at the time was, we need to sell more plastics.
We have the ability to make a ton of plastic. We got to sell it now.
Yeah.
The rosy future of plastics was in disposables, or as Modern Packaging Magazine's editor Lloyd Stuffer put it, which I think the editor of Modern Packaging Magazine's last name being Stuffer
Yeah.
is great. It's like stuffing. It's like
Isn't that-
packaging.
Isn't that like a type of TV dinner or something? Stofers?
Stouffer? I'd have to look that up.
I've seen that name before.
I mean, he's the editor of Modern Packaging Magazine. He could have very well been had a hand in TV.
There's a lot of
dinners.
plastics in those TV dinners,
Oh,
man.
yeah.
I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh my god.
like
Talk about microplastics in food.
Yeah, it doesn't help that food nowadays is in constant contact.
It's all
with
wrapped in
plastic.
plastic. When was the last time you bought food that wasn't wrapped in plastic at one point?
When I deliberately decided not to wrap my food in like my produce,
Yeah.
but having worked at a grocery store before,
Mhm.
I know that food was still shipped in either plastic in a pure form or plastic lined cardboard
Mm.
or other like plastic is still very prevalent to
Oh, I
to
bet.
food. Like that produce you see in the grocery store
Mhm.
sitting on like apples or pears or tomatoes, even though they're stacked neatly and they're kind of like naked, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of plastic is going on kind of in the behind the scenes, behind those foods. It's
Before
like,
they
how did
get-
they get to that grocery
Yeah,
store?
before they
Well,
even get to the store,
they had to be boxed up, you know.
Yeah. And then when you go there, those little rolls of like those green plastic bags, which are ubiquitous in American grocery stores.
yeah,
And people are just pulling bag after bag.
they just pull them out, and
Oh my
generally those bags go right in the trash when you get home, or they sit in your fridge with their contents for a while, and then once you're done with
Mhm.
whatever's in the bag, whether it be raw carrots, you know,
Broccoli.
anything that they encourage you to bag,
Yeah.
it just goes right in the trash.
Not to mention all meat that you buy at the
Oh,
store. All meat is packaged in
She
plastic.
actually goes into that. She was saying like this transition. Soon Scott placed a series of advertising was huge too for
Mhm.
plastics emergence. Like she said, plastics ubiquitousness is as what was the sentence? It's as manufactured as plastic itself.
Right.
I really like the way she put that. Soon Scott placed a series of ads in Life magazine featuring what the company called the first throwaway glass, nice enough for entertaining. The cup made from pure porcelain smooth polystyrene was, the copy promised, absolutely positively guaranteed disposable.
Oh my God. This is
That's so 50s.
this is in the 50s, yeah.
By the 1960s, the era my dad made plastics, the military was buying polystyrene again, this time to manufacture the incendiary Napalm B. But packaging and single-use applications were becoming plastic's largest markets. And then later, consumers, this author Michael explains, could choose only from among goods presented in the marketplace. So it took our ability, like us as consumers, it took the consumer's ability to like say yay or nay to plastics. It made it irrelevant. Everything's plastic.
Yeah.
Like you can't avoid it. And I struggle with that.
It's like the illusion of choice.
Yeah.
That's basically what this person is saying.
Yeah.
Consumers can only choose from among goods presented in the marketplace. If everything presented in the marketplace is wrapped in plastic,
yeah.
you don't have a choice. You have to buy the plastic.
Yeah. And you can choose between more or less plastic, but
Yeah.
you're still choosing something with plastic.
Like that story you told me about the guy who wrote a book all about plastic.
Yes.
And
yes. I can't remember his name, but he wrote
God,
a
what
book
was the
called
book
No More Plastic.
Yeah.
And then he actually wanted, I think he wanted to sue like the publisher or whoever made the physical copies of the book. They packaged it in plastic.
Just wrapped it all in plastic.
They
Individually wrapped.
each book in plastic. Anyway,
Yeah.
that was kind of a
Well, like
equal parts comedy.
if you were to produce a bunch of books without plastic and ship them
Yeah.
to all of the people who would sell them, all of the bookstores, all the independent buyers,
Mhm.
how would you do it? Would you just wrap them in paper?
I guess it,
You know,
like, and
Because
this is the
they
thing.
might get damaged.
Mhm.
The packaging, like the plastics, are durable enough that if you wrap something in plastic, it's probably not going to get damaged in shipping.
Yeah. And that's
If it's something like a book.
that's another that she mentioned too, that like one difficult thing to tackle about plastic is trying to defeat it in terms of competition. It's
Exactly.
very difficult because it is
Right.
such a good substance for what we've made it for,
Mhm.
like protecting books, protecting anything in shipping. Plastic is almost
Or
unrivaled.
like vacuum sealing food.
Yeah. It's like no, you can't vacuum seal anything in paper.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, it's impossible.
So that was another thing she talked on. She mentions this book which I really want to read. At the grocery store, plastics picked off paper item by item: the egg carton, the bread bag, the meat tray, and eventually, though not easily, the grocery sack. Says the science
itself.
writer Susan Frankel in her book "Plastic: A Toxic Love Story."
That's great.
But
But yeah, this is exactly what we're talking about
yeah.
at the grocery store.
Consumers, Michael explains, could only choose from among goods presented in the
You
marketplace.
read that already?
Yeah.
Yeah, this
And
is the
by the closing decades of the 20th century, what was on offer was plastic.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much the history. It went from like a wartime necessity to a surplus of oils fueling a newfound emergence of, a newfound energy in the market.
Mhm.
And then the market then created demand through aggressive ad campaigns, through undercutting their competitors' prices.
Competitive pricing.
And then now we've found ourselves in a situation where we have so much plastic that, one, we're trying to figure out what to do with it once we're done with it, and two, we're trying to figure out what alternatives we
Mhm.
have to this
Because
substance.
it's become clear
Yeah.
that it's harmful for the environment and for people.
Yeah.
You know?
So I guess this is kind of where we enter the part of the conversation that's more conjectural. Like, in my everyday life, I think about this quite a bit, probably more than I would admit to. Because I just went to the grocery store today.
Yeah.
And I had to figure out how I would get my food home. And I use reusable bags.
Mhm.
I put all of my heavy liquid stuff in my backpack, and then I put all of like my more fragile stuff, my perishables, in this like insulated Trader Joe's bag, which is also made mostly of plastic, if
Right.
not entirely of plastic.
Polyester.
But at least it's reusable, you know, like
Yeah.
it's
It's not single use.
in my mind, it's like a step in the right direction. It's
Yeah.
not the end of the right direction, but it's a step. And
Mhm.
I went to the grocery store today, And I bought things like avocados, tomatoes, and broccoli. And the broccoli, I almost never get the little disposable plastic bags for tomatoes, avocados, and those things. But for the broccoli, I had a moment in the store where I was like, should I use I'm gonna get 2 heads of broccoli.
Yeah.
Do I really want them loosely rattling around in my bag? And today I ended up getting one of those plastic bags.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I got it, and I dropped the 2 heads of broccoli in the bag and like twisted it up, folded the bag under it, and put it in my cart. And those plastic bags at the grocery store are ridiculous.
They're clearly designed to go straight into the garbage.
Yeah, like I just from the feel of it, like there's something to be said about like human touch and our ability to comprehend the quality of an object just by touching it. Because that bag, like it gave me revulsion.
Yeah.
Like I touched it and I was like, this substance, there's something fundamentally flawed about this substance. Yeah. It's thin, it makes this weird like high pitched sound when I like crinkle it around.
And it feels like almost liquid.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make you wet.
No.
It doesn't make your hand wet at all.
No, it is. It's like
it's fluid.
It's a fluid solid.
It's so strange.
And there's so much power in it because like I'm gonna put these broccoli in it and it's immediately gonna hold them together in this nice like sack that I can then take home and like the broccoli will be unscathed.
It's amazing like the durability of it in that like it's so cheap and thin and so light. It's practically weightless. And yet it's so durable for when used like that.
Yeah, and I think the sentence that goes through my conscience whenever I hold something like that, or even just like a candy wrapper, like you open up a Nutri-Grain bar and you hold the wrapper for a little bit, the sentence that always pops in my head is like, this shouldn't exist.
Yeah.
It's so unnatural. This
shouldn't exist.
Like, that's why it's kind of revolting to me, is I feel this substance.
Product of the
like,
imagination.
This is so manufactured. It's so far gone from the broccoli that's inside it. Like this broccoli came out of the ground.
Yeah.
It grew. It used to be an organism and we harvested it.
I mean, it still is an organism.
It still is. It's a remnant of a plant.
Right.
A part of a plant. And it's being held by this thing that's so far removed. We took like petroleum out of the ground. We like, I don't even know.
Refined it down.
Yeah. The details of plastic manufacturing are still beyond me, but like we produced 1.8 of these bags worth in carbon dioxide to make this bag.
Yeah.
And then you think about how many rolls of those bags are just in one grocery store. That's how much carbon it is.
Thousands.
Carbon dioxide, like almost twice as much carbon dioxide as those bags.
Well, how many, I mean, you worked there.
Yeah.
How many rolls did you have just on hand in the back?
I mean,
I'm sure you had to replace them.
Oh yeah. I mean, we had pallets of boxes of those bags.
Oh my God.
And on the sales floor at any one time, I would estimate, if you have, because the way this particular store I worked at worked, it would be like just these floating displays that you could kind of roll around and you would stack the food items on those. This is just in a produce department that I worked. And well, I mean, that's the only place you find those rolls of bags is in the produce, because all the meat's packaged and everything else is on a shelf. But yeah, I would estimate at least 25 to 30 rolls of those bags deployed at once,
just on the floor at any time.
At any given time.
Yeah,
because you have the whole wall of produce with the little sprinkler system, that waters it,
and then there are those little bags,
and they're like spaced out at every 10 yards or so.
This reminds me of a trip to the grocery store I made a few months back where I challenged myself to not buy a single plastic item. And I couldn't buy anything wrapped in plastic.
Right.
And I was doing pretty well. I used reusable bags, so I didn't have to buy any plastic. The bags themselves, of course, were made of plastic. But I brought my reusable bags. I had I had some produce bags which were also made of plastic, but they're reusable. They're not single use, and so I felt justified in using them, like you were talking about before.
Yeah.
And I was doing so well. The produce was fine because I had enough bags for everything.
Yeah.
And I didn't get a lot of stuff. I got some like squashes, things that didn't need plastic bags, bananas, things like that. And I got a box of cereal thinking, oh, it's not wrapped in plastic.
Yeah.
And I come home and I open it to have some cereal.
Yeah.
And there's a plastic bag inside the box.
There's the plastic bag holding
And I was like,
the cereal.
I failed. I failed the challenge.
Yeah.
Just like that. And it wasn't obvious to me when I grabbed it off the shelf that I was buying plastic.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It sneaks into everything.
Right on this topic, I maybe I have scrolled right to it, but she said plastic has true, like your wording is perfect. It sneaks in to all of these areas. She was saying how like if you dissolved a can of Coke, like a soda can, there is a layer of plastic inside those cans. They're not 100% metal.
Really?
Yeah.
A can of Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
Has plastic in it.
There's a plastic lining on the metal.
Oh my God, I had no idea.
And
Not just raw
similarly,
aluminum?
things like coffee cups, Starbucks
Yes,
cups. The
those
reason they're so
paper cups.
watertight is because of a little plastic liner inside them.
I knew that.
Yeah.
I knew that they were, and like when I was younger and I looked at these things, the first thing I thought was like wax.
Right.
I thought it was like a waxy substance, but it doesn't come off like wax.
Yeah.
And wax would be too hard to apply onto there.
And this is conjecture, but it also might be more expensive.
It probably is more expensive
to mass produce at a level of like Starbucks cups.
Yeah.
Like
Well, you
Starbucks goes
probably
through so
make
many
it out of
cups.
soy,
Yeah,
or something like that.
alternative.
But that would be more expensive at this point than petroleum-based plastic. So yeah, plastic is ubiquitous.
It's ubiquitous and hard to avoid.
You can't really escape it, at least not in this part of the world.
So
It's fun to think about different ways of life where plastic isn't even a factor, and everything you interact with every day is either organic or of the earth. Plastic made from kelp.
So I just put in this Google search because I remember a little while ago there was a scientist, I believe from South or Central America, can't remember which country, who had developed a plastic alternative substance that was very similar to those thin membrane shopping bags for like produce. It was meant to replace bags, shopping bags, single-use shopping bags, and he made it out of like kelp, out of seaweed. And the benefits of it were that I don't know how many greenhouse gases it produced to make it. That's the only fact that
Probably
I don't
not
know.
zero.
Probably not zero.
Yeah.
I think the whole deal was that it was less than plastic.
Well,
but the main part of it was that it could be ingested.
Mm.
It didn't produce lingering particles.
So if you accidentally ate some microplastics from this you'd be
product
okay,
that he had made,
it
wouldn't harm you. It wouldn't poison you in any sort of way.
Does it like dissolve in
yes.
nature?
So it has
It's biodegradable.
It's biodegradable.
Okay.
It has a much shorter overall lifespan.
Yeah, I imagine if it's made from seaweed.
It was I mean this is Forbes, but I'll just click on this. Seaweed-based sway is a way for single-use plastic to disappear by Jeff Cart. I haven't read this article, but it seemed interesting.
Oh my God. Okay, so I'm looking at those plastics that they have in the picture there.
Yeah.
Made from seaweed. And wait, scroll down a little.
There are so many pop-ups on this
page.
page.
This entire page is just littered with advertisements. To achieve various colors. It uses other plant-based additives to achieve various colors. I was gonna say, because the artificial colors, I expect them to be petroleum-based, but they're not in this case.
So let's see here.
This is interesting because it provides an alternative, but it clearly has a cap. You can only produce so much of it.
Right.
The whole reason we just went into this, why plastics became ubiquitous in the first place, is because there was a surplus in the production capability.
Yeah.
People were like,
crude oil.
Yeah.
Yeah. The fracking boom.
That's probably what drove the increase in plastics production over the past 20 years.
Certainly in the U.S.
Yeah.
And probably in other European countries.
This is amazing to me because this isn't something that people consciously decide. I mean, obviously the individual like decisions to produce more plastic and to market it in a certain way are conscious decisions. But at least in the case of the consumer and like the general market itself, this isn't something that we all decided to do. We didn't decide as a like individually or collectively to start producing more plastic than we could possibly use.
Right.
It sort of just happened because, and I mean, people made the decision, but they were doing it on the basis of how can we make the most money using, the investments that we've made.
Right.
And they invested in plastic manufacturing. And it's like, it's a really amazing substance, yeah, and it can be used for so many things. But it's problematic,
Yeah.
and that's I mean, people know this by now.
Yeah. And
Pretty much everyone I interact with on a daily basis understands that plastic is fucked.
And that's kind of the irony of it, really, is that like we as consumers are often painfully aware at one, the ubiquitousness of plastic, and two, how difficult it is to get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that most people in our demographic know that recycling is a failed program in the United States. Before reading this article, I was unaware of just how big of a failure it is. Her figure, I'd have to do more research, but her figure is like 20% of plastic. That's tiny. That's not a lot of plastic gets reclaimed or successfully recycled.
Yeah.
In the beginning of her article, she was
I
like,
thought it was even less than that. I thought it was closer to like 10.
Maybe like 10
or less.
I could be misremembering that. But yeah, it is not good.
Yeah. I'm constantly reminded by people that like, including you, that like any sort of contamination in a recycling bin, and the entire bin is thrown into the landfill.
Right. And so many people, I mean, even I don't really sort my plastics.
It's not clear.
No.
The resin label is deceiving.
Yeah.
And a lot of plastics that are recyclable technically don't get recycled anyway.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be like the individual's fault.
Yeah.
I mean, I took some trash out today and I threw my recycling into the recycling bin, and what was in there? A whole bag of trash.
Right.
Wrapped in plastic.
Yeah, like if you're going to put this in, this is kind of my argument as to why consumers can't alone solve plastic, is precisely what you're saying. Like, it would have to be a completely unified effort on everyone. Like,
and we've seen that is basically impossible.
It's been like firsthand. There's trash in the recycling bin.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Well, I was talking more about the vaccines.
Yeah. Well, that would be another example about how like unification, true like 100% unification.
There hasn't been a unified effort in this country in a long time.
I mean, really ever, because like there is some individual, always.
Well, yeah, there's always gonna be someone who goes against the grain.
Right.
But it's it's so clear in terms of recent events that like we're split.
As of now we are very split.
Pretty much right down the middle.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, some people, they don't give a shit about this.
Yeah, I mean,
they would read this article. They wouldn't even read the article.
No.
But even if you told them this stuff, they're not going to change what they're doing. One, because it's inconvenient.
Yeah. It's very inconvenient.
It's impractical most of the time to, like, constantly be worried about your own. You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of people don't have the capacity to carry bags with them wherever they go, every time they go to the store or whatever.
Right. And
or
even
to
if
avoid
they
plastics
did,
completely.
even if they are like us trying to like have doing reusable bags, I don't even drive a car. Like I just walk to the store with my bag, fill it up, go home. Like even if you're doing everything right, so to speak, there's still an added mental burden that is unnecessary and not productive on the consumer side. Like worrying about plastics and avoiding them in certain areas certainly makes you consume less plastics. But the reality that this article demonstrates is that they're going to still make the same amount of plastic, whether you as a consumer utilize it or not, because you're so far down the supply chain that you don't really have the power necessarily to just boycott something and it'll go away.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. That's the interesting thing about consumerism, because we're always told in our like individualistic society that one person can make a difference. And we hear these stories of great individuals.
Yeah.
But yet when it comes to these contemporary issues that affect us all, an individual's decision to not use plastic means nothing.
Yeah, nearly nothing.
Yeah.
It's like, so
nearly nothing. I mean, it it might bring some peace of mind to some people
Yeah. And
because they feel like they're not part of the problem anymore.
Right. But in order to bring about change in how much plastic exists in the world, like I was saying earlier, it would take an extremely unified, not necessarily 100% unified, because I don't believe that's possible, but it would still take a very unified effort targeting a very specific thing. Here's my example: grocery store plastic bags. So if everyone being 95% of people, like an extremely large percentage of people who shop at grocery stores just stopped using the plastic bags, both for like produce and like the checkout ones to carry all your groceries. If everyone stopped that, there would be certain other things that popped up. So one, I think the first thing I see happening is those plastic bags would pile up. That they would keep producing them for a little bit. There'd be this overlap window where the grocery store would buy more plastic because they're like, hey, we need our, monthly, yearly quota, whatever it is, of plastic bags. And then they'd realize soon hey, people aren't using these anymore.
Yeah.
We should probably slow down our ordering. Plastic manufacturers would take notice of that. And in her argument, historically, what they've done is just found other ventures in which to replace something with plastic.
With the same material.
So in my example, what I feel like would happen is that reusable bags would be the next plastic bag, and the grocery store would just produce more of their, like Trader Joe's or some, I pick on Trader Joe's because they have their own brand of merchandise and their own bags with their name on it.
They do.
More of those bags would show up because the plastic manufacturers would be sneaky and say, hey, you're going to not use single-use plastics? Well, we're going to make more reusable plastic bags.
Yeah.
And so that would change the nature of the plastic bags, but it wouldn't get rid of them in terms of raw materials used. And in her argument, the issue is the sheer amount of plastic that we have right now is unsustainable.
Yeah.
That's the nitty-gritty of the issue, is that it's not about like reduce, reuse, recycle. It's about stopping. It's like the amount of plastic that we have is unsustainable. And so in my example, like changing single-use bags to reusable bags would certainly get rid of a lot of like immediate landfill issues. Those reusable bags are still eventually going to end up as waste.
Yeah, right.
And they're still implicated in the manufacturing processes of like, this is just our new plastic product.
Right. Yeah, I have a Trader Joe's bag too, man. I mean, they're pretty durable. It's like a more durable plastic than the typical like "thank you for coming" bag,
Right.
But it's still wearing down slowly over time. I've had it for a few years. It's still going to end up in the trash. And I like what you said. It's not about reduce, reuse, recycle. It's about stopping.
Yeah.
That's really what I think. What's her name again?
The
author.
The Atlantic. Her name is
Rebecca Altman.
Altman.
What Rebecca Altman is saying, it is like, it's unsustainable. And we've sort of gotten ourselves into this tricky situation.
Yeah.
Where we can't escape the use of plastic. And even if we tried to adjust our own lives accordingly, the void that is created in the market will be filled in some other way.
Right. That's the tricky situation.
Yeah.
And that's why I brought this in the first place. If I'm going to bring it back to kind of like the big picture, is our ability to solve something on an individual level isn't very big when it comes to issues like this, because there is a flexible, much like plastic, a flexible force working against us.
It's the
like
market.
You said, it fills in the gaps. It is the market of plastic.
Yeah.
So
the plastic market. Yeah.
So that's
It'll
why
adapt.
Yeah, it will, like in this plastic bags example, it will adapt and fill in a void, or at least try to, until something happens that prevents them from
This
doing
is why
so.
we need laws.
Yeah.
This is why we need a law in place that just prevents the use of plastic.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if tomorrow Congress passed a law saying all plastic production is banned?
Yeah, like that would be
That would change our society in a
It would.
fundamental way.
And
I can't even begin to imagine the implications of something like
a
that.
law that drastic.
Yeah. I mean, they wouldn't do that,
No.
but hypothetically.
Yeah, like just as a thought exercise, if a
Yeah.
law came out from the federal government of like every major power
Mhm.
in the world, if like somehow the US, China, the UN, Britain,
Yeah.
Australia, Japan,
Russia, India.
India,
all
if
of
like
those
if everyone
countries.
of those countries just all of a sudden said, "Hey, no more plastic," it's not allowed
Well, so if that happened, the industry would pretty much vanish.
from
Right,
our countries.
Yeah, from the countries where it's illegal, because it's illegal. It cannot happen under law.
Yeah,
There might still be some illegal, shady plastic production. Who knows?
yeah,
If people are really so hooked on it.
yeah.
But, you know, that would still leave us with the question of what to do with the plastic we already have.
Exactly.
I think we should just launch into space.
Yeah, I mean that's something that I've thought of a lot.
Because it would, of course, it would burn petroleum to get it in there, to get it into space.
Yeah. But it would kind of be like ripping a Band-Aid off. It'd be like
Yeah.
one last giant production of CO2 to put an end to it all.
Yeah, just shoot it at the sun.
Shoot it at the sun.
The sun does not discriminate.
No, it burns everything.
Yeah,
It's a series of nuclear bombs just constantly going off.
it's pretty amazing that we just encircle a ball of fire that sustains us
Yeah.
with its radiation.
And we play these little games with plastic.
Yeah,
we decided, hey, let's frack.
whoever came up with that term should be
Held
don't know.
responsible.
Yeah, they need to be held liable for some damages.
Fracking. Damages to my psyche.
I'm gonna frack them.
So yeah, I mean, to tie it up, I guess
How bad are plastics really? I think we know the answer to the question. The answer is they're really bad.
they're really bad. And you know, what should we do about it?
Mhm.
As a consumer, I don't think we should be forced to do much.
Well, no one
Instead-
would force us.
Yeah, instead, I think the solution that this article is kind of leaning towards is in public policy.
Yeah.
In law.
Yeah.
As well as well, yeah, basically just law.
I mean, this is what happens when certain markets go unchecked,
Yeah.
and they have damaging, impacts that no one predicted.
And it's
We need
flown,
rules to regulate them.
it's flown under the radar of policymakers, as she mentioned. You know, a lot of our focus has been in, clean energy. We're looking to reduce greenhouse gases in that sector, which is good.
Mhm.
Like solar, renewable energy that doesn't pollute
Mhm.
always should be a priority, in my
Oh, yeah.
opinion. But in kind of the politicized environment of it, plastics has managed to kind of sneak under the radar of everyone's
Yeah.
discussion, because I feel like you mentioned earlier, some people wouldn't even read this article. Some people don't care about this. But I feel like there's also a fear of caring about it. Because in my experience, I gotta stop saying carrying. Caring about this hurts. Like my
Yeah.
trip to the grocery store today hurt me a little bit in terms of just like stress and like having this awareness
Yeah.
and saying like, look at all this plastic around me.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
It's stressful. And I feel like a lot of people just don't feel ready.
Mhm.
But this argues that, we need to be having this conversation. And I have to agree. Like all of the projections that I've seen for climate change are pretty grim.
Yeah.
And
It's hard not to be stressed out about that,
yeah.
especially
So-
if you're young.
Yeah.
I think it's not to say it's any worse for old people or any less. Rather,
it's dire.
it's I don't know, man. I feel like it affects young people more because we're gonna see how this plays out.
Well, yeah.
Assuming we live the next 50 years, we're gonna
Right.
see this
yeah,
really play
like
out.
those projections for 2030 and 2050 respectively.
We're gonna be
are
here to
both
see that.
within our lifespans. And the other thing is we especially, kind of we fall into kind of that Gen Z
Mhm.
millennial gap, but like these generations now, your 18 to 38 year olds
Mhm.
basically, we're all generally in a time of our lives where we are really thinking hard about the future,
Mhm. Right.
about our jobs, the lives we want when we grow up.
Mhm.
This is the time to grow up, and to be faced with this,
Yeah.
it is hard to like think about all this stuff that we have relatively little control over. um Bringing back to the plastic bag example,
Mhm.
like you can do a lot of personal, you can change your behaviors and your consumption patterns, um but unless you just completely stop being involved in plastics, it's going to be pretty hard to avoid them, especially, we live in Chicago.
Mhm.
It's hard to avoid
It's
plastics
very
in
hard,
an
yeah.
urban environment.
Yeah.
Like, cuz the every time I think about like escaping the system or like refusing to consume, I always think about running off to the countryside and living in like a cabin and only
Mhm.
using like wood and metal as like
Right.
my two material goods. And
That's a
that's not
fun.
realistic for everyone,
Right, of
right?
course.
Because if we all ran off to the countryside, there would be no countryside because
Yeah.
there's so many people on Earth.
Yeah. That's
So
interesting. Definitely.
so really, the solution becomes political,
Well, yeah, I
like
think
governmental.
if we are to act in any sort of unified way, there needs to be some sort of law.
Yeah.
That's why we have a government,
Hmm.
to enforce commonly held, standards and objectives.
Yeah.
And
So
it's also it's troubling to me to see like the way politics has been operating now, and
right.
like, dude, all I can think right now is that like Biden is so old and he shouldn't be in office.
I mean,
That's all I
yeah.
can really think.
There's
Because how could someone like that? I'm not trying to bash old people.
yeah.
I think old people have a lot to teach young people,
Hmm.
but there comes a point where you need a different kind of perspective on these things. And he comes from
Right.
an era where this wasn't a concern. Like
Right. It
most of
literally wasn't a concern.
it wasn't until recently. And the people paying the most attention to this are the people who have the most to lose, which are young people.
Yeah.
Because like you said, we're in a point in our lives where we're planning for the future. We're trying to see how things are going to work. And the way plastics are looking, it doesn't bode well.
Right.
So I think we just need someone with a different perspective to rally people together on this.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're going to see it in the current administration, unfortunately,
Yeah. The next.
because they haven't talked about plastics at all. I mean,
Right.
they're like build back better energy. What do they call it? The Green New Deal.
It's
That's pretty much fizzled out.
Green New Deal, and yeah, the current plan is sort of the Build Back Better plan.
I haven't heard anything about the Green New Deal recently
Yeah,
in terms of
it's
like progress towards something meaningful.
yeah, it's basically compromised into the Build Back Better plan, as far as I know. I
Yeah.
would have to pay more attention to what's going on, in as far as legislature goes.
Yeah. And that's another thing. I think it's very difficult now to process all the information that's coming at us. It's important
Right.
to have the awareness of these topics, but at the same time, we need to maintain a sort of sanity.
Right.
And right now, the current media environment is not conducive to that.
The sheer amount of fluff and just, yeah, like you said, the amount of media that is ultimately useless
Mhm.
to us is difficult, time consuming, and draining to sift through in order to get to the facts.
Exactly.
But
So
the
how can you
useful
expect
information.
the majority of people to maintain knowledge about this?
I can't, because I haven't maintained
Right.
like knowledge about this. I don't know what is in the Build Back Better plan. I admittedly
It's hard to know. I mean, there's so
clueless.
much other stuff that we're paying attention to and trying to keep up with, and
Yeah.
like the 24-hour news cycle has completely like
Yeah.
taken over the public like awareness.
Right.
It's really kind of shocking to see the way that everyone's plugged in reading these things, and yet no one can come together on any of them.
Yeah.
It's tough. And so the like this conversation even is just one part of like a sea of information that is
Right.
like impossible to traverse on your own. And you couldn't like. I mean, you do get meaningful things out of it. I get meaningful things out of the internet all the time,
Yeah,
but it's
certainly.
it's taken a long time to whittle down
Right.
like what I'm interested in, and also like I don't read a lot of the stuff that I used to read. You know,
Yeah.
I still consume a lot of media on the internet, but I don't. I do it in a better way, I think. You know,
It's hard to
a
pin
healthier
down.
way.
Yeah.
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard to describe like what is the best way to be an internet user.
It is, and this just goes back to like your mention of Biden and older generations.
Mhm.
It's truly a transitional period because millennials are the first generation to have grown up with the
Mhm.
internet. Like this is new to everyone.
It's new.
Like the
Yeah.
ways we use the internet, the ways that we obtain information, we
We're-
are the
yeah.
groundbreaking generation in terms of figuring out our sense of ethics, our code
Mhm.
for what is proper internet usage. We don't know. We're
Yeah.
learning that.
Yeah,
And
I mean, we don't know the effects of long-term internet use yet.
certainly
Over an entire lifetime?
over an entire lifetime. No, because no one's lived an entire lifetime.
What's this going to do to our brains, man?
Well, I mean,
We evolved to like play in the dirt and go for swims and
Yeah.
like and hunt game and pick
Hunt.
berries and sit around the fire. Like
well, this is just another
we didn't-
conversation in the making.
exactly.
There's
Yeah. We didn't evolve to discern between polystyrene and tocopherols and
or
like-
to judge like a credible news source over the other,
right, yeah.
or like the value of certain information over the other. We
Exact-
just we are designed to intake information
Yeah.
as fast as possible.
Right.
And that's why our current situation is so stressful, is
Mhm.
because we are designed by survival instincts to say what is
going on?
What is going on? What can I learn that will benefit my survival and my life in the future?
And yet there's so much information at
Right.
hand at any moment that you cannot possibly read it all or
which is
listen to it all.
why we're doing this podcast, because we're trying to pinpoint
Mhm.
things that are important to us. And to me, that's why I brought this plastics article in today, is because out of my feed, my usually fruitless morning ritual of
I
scrolling
like how you describe
through,
it as fruitless, as if
through-
there's nothing to gain from it.
yeah, well, most of the time I come away from it feeling like I've gained nothing.
Yeah.
Like I've just spent a little bit of time avoiding my responsibilities or my
yeah.
own conscience.
That's
and
what
just
it's
like,
there for.
and just scrolling,
It's to
it's literally
procrastinate.
this motion with your thumb.
We all do it now.
We all know. And this popped out at me as something that was actually valuable and beneficial to my being.
Mhm.
I think that's a good point to
Mhm.
have for this podcast. And
Just to reiterate the title of the article, it's from The Atlantic. It's called "How Bad Are Plastics Really?" by Rebecca Altman.
yeah, check it out.
And we should, next time we do this, we should have if we do like a Zoom meeting, we could have this screen recorded.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, we should definitely share a screen next time. But yeah, the article "How Bad Are Plastics Really?" By Rebecca Altman, again on The Atlantic, was kind of today's topic of discussion.
How bad are plastics really?
So yeah,
We don't know yet.
we don't know yet.
But we know that we know we don't know how much, but we do know that they're bad.
we're getting a feel for it, and things aren't looking good. So, if you
Dude, the poor plankton.
yeah, microplastics, that's the other crazy thing about this whole issue and about our environmental issues in general,
Mhm.
is that we often like I say we, but I mean to single out like industries
Yeah.
often dive into these products with little regard for consequence.
Yeah.
And those consequences, as we've found out with plastics, are way beyond what we imagined.
Yeah.
Because like I'm sure someone knew that microplastics would be a thing when they were designing plastics and figuring out new polymers to make, but they kept their mouths shut about it, or they didn't raise enough of a voice about it. And
Or they didn't suspect that it would become such a big thing.
yeah, they didn't suspect that microplastics would affect plankton, which
Right.
if I lived in the 50s, that would have been beyond my imagination.
Right.
So that's kind of one thing that alleviates some of my negative emotions
Mhm.
about this issue, is that you can't.
We couldn't have known.
Yeah, like you can't really paint even these corporations back then as completely evil. They're made up of people who were just like trying to make a profit, make a living, and obviously, yeah, you could talk about how the market like dehumanizes people or like enter that discussion. But what I'm trying to say is there was no way that everyone knew the full impact of what they were doing.
Yeah, I mean, we still don't.
We still don't know. Like the science is in its infancy still. And the fact that we're discovering just now that microplastics are affecting plankton's ability to photosynthesize is mind-boggling to me.
It's mind-boggling.
And to think about how mind-boggling it would be to someone in the 50s really does kind of alleviate some of my animosity, at least for the situation, some of my stress.
I see what you're saying.
It's given me a more neutral perspective emotionally. It's like my perspective now is that we're in this situation and we got ourselves here, sure, and we can like blame ourselves as much as we want, but that's not going to solve the issue.
Right.
It's more just like, here's the latest information, and now we've got to talk about it. We've got to figure out some sort of solution because the science is pointing towards, environmental catastrophes, like bad things.
Yeah.
And so even though that bit is stressful, and it should be, I think that alone is still within the realm of like a healthy amount of stress. It's what drives political action in the first place is anxieties about an outcome and like avoiding that outcome. It's why the US rallied around airport security after 9/11. That was fear. That was anger, tragedy, stress. This is exactly the same in my mind.
I see.
Something is happening. We learned more about it, and now we got to deal with it.
Yeah.
But I think blaming the past on it isn't productive. It's like being angry at
the past is done.
Yeah.
It's over.
So now we're here.
Yeah.
And we got to deal with plastic. And
we got to deal with it.
I'm thankful for this article for bringing it up because
I learned a few things.
It was slipping to the back of my mind, obviously, and I'm a person who thinks about it a lot.
Right. Well, this is what I'm saying. Like, we're thinking about so many different things.
Yeah.
Like, I know just from our past conversations that the topics that we've been conscious about the past year and a half have been, well, and even going further back, they've just been so broad in terms of topics and scope. But yeah, I think this was a good place to start.
Yeah.
Plastics, it's something that everyone who would listen to something like this has come in contact with.
Yeah, I mean, it's
probably baked into their lives.
Yeah. If you're living in the United States, you've come into contact with plastic.
That's amazing. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. Like,
it's
100 years ago, this stuff didn't exist.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Like
and now it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
it's in every industry.
Existed. Yeah.
Like, I work in a restaurant and we get shipments in of clean rags from the laundry. And they're all wrapped in plastic.
Exactly.
It's something that you wouldn't even think of. But yet it's single-use plastic. It goes straight into the trash when we're done with it.
Right.
And what does it go into? It goes into a plastic bin lined with flexible plastic bags. And then that goes into the dumpster. And then into the landfill.
Yeah, just like
there's so much.
At my current job, just evaluating how much plastic we go through is kind of staggering.
Yeah. All the food comes wrapped in plastic for the most part. Like even if it's frozen, like it's wrapped in plastic.
Right.
Yeah. It's mind-blowing.
If we had a soundboard right now, we would have queued up the live rendition of
It's Plastic.
It's Plastic. The live rendition of Plastic Love.
Oh my God, by Maria Takeuchi and Tatsuro Yamashita.
Yeah. And in that recording, he he provides these backup vocals that we often quote a lot whenever we take notice of the plastic around us. He's just belting on the microphone.
I do like just holding up something like this.
Like this light.
It's plastic.
It's plastic. And then we usually like shake it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, anyway. I think this would be a good place to stop.
I think this is a good place to wrap up.
Talked for an hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Well, hour 40. we started 5 minutes into the recording.
for the recording. So, yeah.
That's
you're
it,
listening-
everybody.
Thanks.
Thank
if
you.
you're listening, thank you for listening. We hope to produce more of these, bringing in more articles, hopefully bringing in guests soon.
Some guests.
And yeah, titling this "Humanity Restored." We'll eventually get a soundboard going where we can play
Hell
like
yeah,
the
dude.
Dark Souls noise.
I really want a soundboard.
where you like restore
Restore
your humanity.
humanity.
You like spend one at the bonfire, and it makes that really cool sound. That'll be kind of our, I think, intro and outro.
Oh, I agree. That should be
That'd be awesome.
We could work on that right now, actually.
Yeah.
After this, but yeah,
Yeah.
this is us signing off.
Peace.